Before you hear how we fought on their heaviest planets, you must know one truth. We were never meant to survive those worlds. The first time our boots touched their soil, the ground itself tried to pull us into its depths. The air pushed against our lungs like an unseen hand refusing to let us breathe. And in that crushing silence we understood that the universe had been hiding its darkest lessons on the heaviest worlds. Lessons that would break our bones. Lessons that would bend our spirits. Lessons that would show us what it truly means to fight when the planet beneath you wants you gone. How we fought on their heaviest planets. In the age before we understood how small we truly were, we believed that every world beyond our sky was waiting quietly for us to discover it, and learn from it, and walk upon it with the same ease with which we roamed our own gentle home. We were wrong. The universe was never gentle. And the worlds we found were shaped by forces older and more relentless than anything we were prepared to face. Our story begins on a planet that moved like a wounded giant through its orbit, a world so heavy that even the light it reflected felt strained and weary, a world the early scouts simply called the First Weight. When we landed, we thought we understood what it meant to stand on alien soil, but the ground welcomed us with a pressure that bent metal and bruised bone. As if the planet itself challenged us for every breath we dared to take. Every step felt like lifting mountains. Every heartbeat fought to escape the crushing pull of the world below. And yet we pressed on because humanity had always been stubborn in the face of the impossible. The first soldiers who walked the First Weight did not arrive with the pride of conquerors but with the quiet determination of survivors. They moved slowly through forests that clung low to the ground, shaped by gravity that refused to let anything rise beyond a few meters. Even the wind crawled instead of swept, whispering in heavy waves across the soil. And the sky pressed down like an unseen hand, reminding us that nothing on this world was meant to rise. Then came the first signs that we were not alone. Tracks in the soil too deep for any human step. Shadows moving in the thick horizon. A rhythmic tremor that pulsed through the ground as if the heart of the planet itself was beating. We did not come to wage war. We came to explore. But the First Weight did not care for our intentions. The beings that lived there had grown under gravity so fierce it reshaped life itself. Creatures with wide bodies anchored low to the ground. Limbs like pillars. Movements slow but unstoppable. Their skin seemed carved from stone, hardened by a lifetime of resisting the world that tried to flatten them. To them we must have looked like fragile drifting things, barely anchored to anything. And perhaps that is why they struck. The first attack came not with sound, but with vibration, a rolling wave of force spreading through the ground, throwing our soldiers off their feet. The heavy beings approached in silence, their weight alone creating shockwaves that split the earth. Our weapons worked, but only barely, for the atmosphere swallowed the energy and the ground dragged every projectile downward. It felt like fighting underwater, except the water was made of gravity itself. Our lines broke. Our voices cracked. And the First Weight began to crush not only our bodies but our hope. But humanity endures. And in the ashes of the first battle we adapted. We learned to anchor ourselves with metal stakes driven deep into the soil. We learned to breathe in shallow, steady rhythms to spare our hearts. We reshaped our armor into broad, low forms that echoed the creatures we faced. And slowly the planet that sought to break us became the planet that taught us how to survive. Our second campaign brought us to a world heavier still. A world where mountains lay flat against the horizon like sleeping giants. Where the oceans crawled instead of flowed. Where the sky sagged beneath its own weight. We called it the Second Bend for the way everything seemed bent downward by forces unseen. Here we faced not creatures of flesh but creatures of stone. Massive beings that grew like living sculptures, rising slowly from the ground over centuries. They did not move swiftly. They did not need to. Each step they took sent ripples radiating through the earth. And when they fell in battle, the impact traveled for miles, leveling everything in its path. On the Second Bend we learned the true meaning of patience. The battles lasted hours, not minutes. Every movement had to be calculated. Every breath counted. Every fall became a catastrophe. We lost many. But we learned more. We created exosuits with internal pressure fields to fight the crushing weight. We built weapons that delivered force sideways instead of downward, using the planet's own gravity as guidance. We fought not by resisting the world but by bending with it. And for the first time humanity began to understand what it meant to meet a planet on its own terms. But the hardest world awaited us still. The third and final heavy planet in the chain, the world our ancestors would later call the last hold. From orbit it looked calm, almost peaceful, a sphere of deep blue and muted green wrapped in thick layers of atmosphere. But the ship shook the moment we descended. The air itself felt heavy. The clouds hung like oceans. And the ground below seemed to pull at us with intent. The last hold was different. It was not simply heavy. It was alive in ways we could not have imagined. The planet was covered in something between forest and muscle. A living landscape that tightened and relaxed in slow planetary rhythms. Roots thicker than towers. Vines that crept silently across the ground. Ground that swelled and shifted beneath our feet. It was on this world that humanity faced a new kind of enemy. Not one born of flesh or stone, but one born of the world itself. The creatures there were woven from the living terrain. Shaped by the pulsing cycles of the planet. They rose out of the earth. They sank back into it. They fought with the strength of the planet, pushing behind every blow. We were not facing a species. We were facing an ecosystem that defended itself with intention and precision. For the first time we questioned whether our presence was a mistake. Whether exploration had become intrusion. Whether survival was worth the violence it demanded. The battles were unlike anything we had known. The ground rose beneath us. The air tightened like a fist. The creatures moved in waves connected by the living network beneath the soil. Our weapons scattered. Our armor buckled. Our spirits dimmed. But even on the last hold humanity found a way. Not through strength. Not through force. But through understanding. Through listening. We learned the rhythms of the planet. The breathing patterns of the living ground. The quiet pulses traveling beneath the roots. We learned when the land tightened. When it relaxed. When it sensed danger. We began to move in harmony with the world rather than against it. And slowly the battles shifted. We found ways to communicate with the creatures. Not with words. But through pressure. Through movement. Through vibration. We signaled to them that we were not predators. We were not invaders. We were simply beings struggling to exist in a universe far heavier than we had ever imagined. And for the first time on the last hold, the attacks stopped. On that day humanity realized something profound. The universe had never been silent. It had been speaking in forces, in rhythms, in gravity, and we had finally learned to listen. When the war ended we did not claim victory. Because victory implied dominance. And dominance meant nothing on worlds that could crush us without effort. Instead we claimed understanding. We claimed survival. We claimed humility. We returned home carrying scars etched deep into our bones. Scars left by worlds that had pulled at us with ancient power. Scars that reminded us that every planet has its own story. Its own weight. Its own way of shaping life. And though the battles were brutal, though the ground tried to break us, though the creatures rose against us, we also found something beautiful in the struggle. A reminder that strength is not found in how high we can climb, but in how low we can endure, how far we can bend without breaking, how deeply we can root ourselves when the world grows heavy. In the end, the story of how we fought on their heaviest planets is not a story of war. It is a story of transformation, a story of learning to move slowly, to breathe deliberately, to respect forces far greater than our own. It is the story of how humanity faced worlds that should have crushed us. And yet somehow, we rose.